Chapter 7. The wagon creaked monotonously, and the sun was already well into the west, though it still poured hot streams of daylight upon us. Back among the cases, Ganelon snored, and I envied him his noisy occupation. We had been sleeping for several hours, and this was my third day without rest. We were perhaps 15 miles out of the city, and heading into the northeast. Doyle had not had my order completely ready, but Ganelon and I had persuaded him to close up his shop and accelerate its production. This involved several additional hours' curse-worthy delay. I had been too keyed up to sleep then, and was unable to do so now, as I was edging my way through shadows. I forced back the fatigue in the evening and found some clouds to shade me. We moved along a dry, deeply rutted clay road. It was an ugly shade of yellow, and it cracked and crumbled as we went. Brown grasses hung limply on either side of the way, and the trees were short, twisted things, their barks thick and shaggy. We passed numerous outcrops of shale. I had paid Doyle well for his compounds, and had also purchased a handsome bracelet to be delivered by Tidara the following day. But diamonds were at my belt, Grey Swan deer near to my hand. Star and Firedrake walked steadily, strongly. I was on my way to having it made. I wondered whether Benedict had returned home yet. I wondered how long he would remain deceived as to my whereabouts. I was by no means out of danger from him. He could follow a trail for a great distance through shadow, and I was leaving him a good one. I had little choice in the matter, though. I needed the wagon. I was stuck with our present speed, and I was in no condition to manage another hell ride. I handled the shifts slowly and carefully, very conscious of my dulled senses and growing weariness, counting on the gradual accumulation of change and distance to build up a barrier between Benedict and myself, hoping that it would soon become an impenetrable one. I found my way from late afternoon back to noontide within the next 2 miles, but kept it a cloudy noon, for it was only its light that I desired, not its heat. Then I managed to locate a small breeze. It increased the probability of rain, but it was worth it. You can't have everything. I was fighting back drowsiness by then, and the temptation was great to awaken Ganelon and simply add more miles to our distance by letting him drive while I slept. But I was afraid to try it this early in the journey. There were still many things to do. I wanted more daylight, but I also wanted a better road, and I was sick of that goddamned yellow clay. And I had to do something about those clouds, and I had to keep in mind where we were headed. I rubbed my eyes. I took several deep breaths. Things were starting to jump around inside my head, and the steady clop-clop of the horse's hoofs and the creaking of the wagon were starting to have a soporific effect. I was already numb to the jolting and the swaying. The reins hung loosely in my hands, and I had already nodded and let them slip once. Fortunately, the horses seemed to have a good idea as to what was expected of them. After a time, we mounted a long, easy slope that led down into mid-morning. By then, the sky was quite dark, and it took several miles and half a dozen twistings of the road to dissipate the cloud cover somewhat. A storm could turn our way into a river of mud quite quickly. I winced at the thought, let the sky alone, and concentrated on the road once more. We came to a dilapidated bridge leaning across a dry stream bed. On its other side, the road was smoother, less yellow. As we proceeded, it grew darker, flatter, harder, and the grass came green beside it. By then, though, it had begun raining. I fought with this for a time, determined not to surrender my grass in the dark, easy road. My head ached, but the shower ended within a quarter of a mile, and the sun came out once more. The sun. Oh yes, the sun. We rattled on, finally coming to a dip in the road that kept twisting its way down among brighter trees. We descended into a cool valley, where we eventually crossed another small bridge. In this one was a narrow band of water, drifting along the middle of the bed beneath it. I had wrapped the reins about my wrist by then, because I kept nodding. As from a great distance, I focused my concentration, straightening, sorting. Birds queried the day, tentatively, from within the woods to my right. Glistening droplets of dew clung to the grass, the leaves. A chill came into the air, and the rays of the morning sun slanted down through the trees. But my body was not fooled by the awakening within this shadow, and I was relieved to finally hear Ganelon stir and curse. If he had not come around before much longer, I would have had to awaken him. Good enough. I tugged gently on the reins, and the horses got the idea and halted. I put on the brake, as we were still on an incline, and located a water bottle. "Here," said Ganelon as I drank. "Leave a drop for me." I passed the bottle back to him. "You are taking over now," I told him. "I've got to get some sleep." He drank for half a minute, and then let out an explosive exhalation. "Right," he said, swinging himself over the edge of the wagon and down. "But bide a moment. Nature summons." He stepped off the road, and I crawled back into the bed of the wagon, and stretched out where he had lain, folding my cloak into a pillow. Moments later, I heard him climb into the driver's seat. There was a jolt as he released the brake. I heard him cluck his tongue and snap the reins lightly. "Is it morning?" he called back to me. "Yes." "God, I've slept all day and night." I chuckled. "No, I did a little shadow shifting," I said. "You've only slept 6 or 7 hours." "I don't understand, but never mind, I believe you. Where are we now?" "Still heading northeast," I said. "Around 20 miles out of the city and maybe a dozen or so from Benedict's place. We have moved through shadow also." "What am I to do now?" "Just keep following the road. We need the distance." "Could Benedict still reach us?" "I think so. That's why we can't give the horses their rest yet." "All right. Is there anything special I should be alert for?" "No." "When should I rouse you?" "Never." He was silent then, and as I waited for my consciousness to be consumed, I thought of Dara, of course. I've been thinking of her off and on all day. The thing had been quite unpremeditated on my part. I had not even thought of her as a woman until she came into my arms and revised my thinking on that subject. A moment later, and my spinal nerves took over, reducing much of what passes for cerebration down to its basics, as Freud had once said to me. I could not blame it on the alcohol, as I had not had that much, and it had not affected me especially. Why did I want to blame it on anything? Because I felt somewhat guilty. That was why. She was too distant a relation for me to really think of her as one. That was not it. I did not feel I had taken unfair advantage of her, for she had known what she was doing when she came looking for me. It was the circumstances that made me question my own motives, even in the midst of things. I'd wanted to do more than simply win her confidence and a measure of friendship when I had first spoken with her and taken her onto that walk into shadow. I was trying to alienate some of her loyalty, trust, and affection from Benedict and transfer it to myself. I'd wanted her on my side as a possible ally in what might become an enemy camp. I'd hoped to be able to use her should the need arise when the going got rough. All this was true. But I did not want to believe that I had had her as I did just to further this end. I suspected there was some truth to it, though, and it made me feel uncomfortable and more than a little ignoble. Man, I'm getting mixed up today on my words. Sorry about that. Why? I'd done plenty of things in my time that many would consider much worse, and I was not especially troubled by these. I wrestled with it, not liking to admit it, but already knowing the answer. I cared for the girl. It was as simple as that. It was different from the friendship I had felt for Lorraine, with its element of world-weary understanding between two veterans about it, or the air of casual sensuality that had existed briefly between Moira and myself, back before I had taken the pattern for the second time. It was quite different. I had known her so briefly that it was most illogical. I was a man with centuries behind me, yet I had not felt this way in centuries. I'd forgotten the feeling until now. I did not want to be in love with her, not now. Later, perhaps. Better yet, not at all. She was all wrong for me. She was a child. Everything that she would want to do, everything that she would find new and fascinating, I had already done. No, it was all wrong. I had no business falling in love with her. I should not let myself. Ganelon hummed some bawdy tune, badly. The wagon jounced and cracked, took a turn uphill. The sun fell upon my face, and I covered my eyes with my forearm. Somewhere thereabout, oblivion fixed its grip and squeezed. When I awoke, it was past noon, and I was feeling grimy. I took a long drink of water, poured some in the palm of my hand, and rubbed it in my eyes. I combed my hair with my fingers. I took a look at our surroundings. There was greenery about us, small stands of trees and open spaces where tall grasses grew. It was still a dirt road that we traveled, hard-packed and fairly smooth. The sky was clear, but for a few small clouds, and shade alternated with sunlight fairly regularly. There was a light breeze. "Back among the living! Good," said Ganelon, as I climbed over the front wall and took a seat beside him. "The horses are getting tired, Corwin. I'd like to stretch my legs a bit," he said. "I'm also getting very hungry. Aren't you?" "Yes. Pull off into that shady place to the left and we'll stop a while." "I would like to go on a bit farther than that," he said. "For any special reason?" "Yes. I want to show you something." "Go ahead." We clopped along for perhaps half a mile, then came to a bend in the road that took us in a more northerly direction. Before very long, we came to a hill, and when we had mounted it, there was another hill, leading even higher. "How much farther do you want to go?" I said. "Let's take this next hill," he replied. "We might be able to see it from up there." "All right." The horses strained against the steepness of that second hill, and I got out and pushed from behind. When we finally reached the top, I felt even grimier from the mixture of sweat and dust, but I was fully awake once more. Ganelon reined in the horses and put on the brake. He climbed back into the wagon and up onto a crate then. He stood, facing to the left, and shaded his eyes. "Come up here, Corwin," he called. I climbed over the tailgate, and he squatted and extended a hand. I took it, and he helped me up onto the crate, where I stood beside him. He pointed, and I followed the gesture. Perhaps 3/4 of a mile distant, running from left to right for as far as I could see, was a wide, black band. We were several hundred yards higher than the thing, and had a decent view of, and I would say, half a mile of its length. It was several hundred feet across, and though it curved and turned twice that I could see, its width appeared to remain constant. There were trees within it, and they were totally black. There seemed to be some movement. I could not say what it was. Perhaps it was only the wind rippling the black grasses near its edge. But there was also a definite sensation of flowing in it, like currents in a flat, dark river. "What is it?" I said.
"Perhaps I thought you could tell me," Ganelon replied. "I'd thought it part of your shadow sorceries."
I shook my head slowly. Now I was quite drowsy, but I would remember if I had arranged for anything that strange to occur. "How do you know it was there?"
"We skirted it several times as you slept, then edged away again. I did not like the feeling at all. It was a very familiar one. Does it not remind you of something?"
Yes, it does. Unfortunately." He nodded.
"It's like that damned circle back in the rain. That's what it's like."
"The Black Road," I said.
"What?"
"The Black Road," I repeated. I did not know what she was referring to when she mentioned it, but now I begin to understand. This is not good at all.
Another ill omen?
I'm afraid so. He cursed then.
Will it cause us any immediate trouble?
He asked. I don't believe so, but I'm not certain. He climbed down from the crate and I followed.
Let's find some forage for the horses, then, he said, and tend to our own bellies as well.
Yes. He moved forward and he took the reins. We found a good spot at the foot of the hill. We tarried there for the better part of an hour, talking mainly of Avalon. We did not speak again of the Black Road, though I thought of it quite a bit. I had to get a closer look at the thing, of course. When we were ready to move on, I took the reins again. The horses, somewhat refreshed, moved out at a good pace. Ganelon sat beside me on the left, still in a talkative mood. I was only just then beginning to realize how much this strange homecoming had meant to him. He had revisited many of his old haunts from the days of his outlawry, as well as 4 battlefields where he had distinguished himself greatly after he had achieved respectability. I was in many ways moved by his reminiscences. An unusual mixture of gold and clay, this man. He should have been an amberite. The miles slid by quickly, and we were drawing near to the Black Road again, when I felt a familiar mental jab. I passed the reins to Ganelon. "Take them," I said. "Drive."
"What is it?"
"Later. Just drive."
"Should I hurry?"
"No. Keep it normal, and don't say anything for a while." I closed my eyes and rested my head into my hands, emptying my mind and building a wall around the emptiness. No one home. Out to lunch. No solicitors. This property is vacant. Do not disturb. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Beware of dog. Falling rock. Slippery when wet. To be raised for urban renewal. It ceased, then came on again, hard, and I blocked it again. There followed a third wave. I stopped that one, too. And then it was gone. I sighed, massaged my eyeballs. "It's all right now," I said.
"What happened?"
"Someone tried to reach me by a very special means. It was almost certainly Benedict. He must just now have found out about any number of things that could make him want to stop us. I'll take the reins again now. I fear he will be on our trail soon." Ganelon handed them over.
"What are our chances of escaping him?"
"Pretty fair now, I'd say, that we've got more distance behind us. I'm going to shuffle some more shadows as soon as my head stops spinning." I guided us on, and our way twisted and wound, paralleling that Black Road for a time, then heading in closer to it. Finally, we were only a few 100 yards away from it. Ganelon studied it in silence for a long while, then said,
"It reminds me too much of that other place. The little tongues of mist that lick about things. The feeling that something is always moving just around the corner of your eye."
I bit my lip. I began to perspire heavily. I was trying to shift away from the thing now, and there was some sort of resistance. It was not the same feeling of monolithic immovability as occurs when you try to move through shadow and amber. It was altogether different. It was a feeling of inescapability. We moved through shadow, all right. The sun drifted higher in the heavens, heading back toward noonday. For I did not relish the thought of nightfall beside that black strip. And the sky lost something of its blue, and the trees shot higher about us, and the mountains appeared in the distance. Was it that the road cut through shadow itself? It must. Why else would Gerard and Julien have located it and been sufficiently intrigued to explore the thing? It was unfortunate, but I feared we had much in common, that road and I. Damn it. We moved beside it for a long while, gradually moving closer together, also. Soon, only about 100 feet separated us. 50. And, as I felt they eventually must, our paths finally intersected. I drew rein. I packed my pipe and lit it, smoked as I studied the thing. Star and Firedrake obviously did not approve of the black area that cut across our way. They had whinnied and tried to pull off to the side. It was a long diagonal cut across the black place if we wanted to keep on the road. Also, part of the terrain was hidden from our sight by a series of low stone hills. There were heavy grasses at the edge of the black, and patches of it here and there about the foot of the hills. Bits of mist scudded along them, and faint vaporous clouds hovered in all the hollows. The sky, seen through the atmosphere that hung about the place, was several shades darker, with a smeared, sooty tone to it. A silence that was not the same as stillness lay upon it, almost as though some unseen entity were poised, holding its breath. Then we heard a scream. It was a girl's voice. The old lady in distress trick? It came from somewhere to the right, beyond those hills, and it smelled fishy, but hell, it could be real. I tossed the reins to Ganelon and jumped to the ground, taking Grace Wandeer into my hand. "I'm going to investigate," I said, moving off to the right and leaping the gully that ran beside the road.
Hurry back.
I plowed through some brush and scrambled up a rocky slope. I pushed my way through more shrubbery on its downside and mounted another, higher slope. The scream came again as I was climbing it, and this time I heard other sounds as well. Then I reached the top and was able to see for a good distance. The back area began about 40 feet below me, and the scene I sought was laid about 150 feet within it. It was a monochromatic sight, save for the flames. A woman, all in white, black hair hanging loose down to her waist, was bound to one of those dark trees, smoldering branches heaped about her feet. Half a dozen hairy albino men, almost completely naked and continuing the process of undressing as they moved, shuffled about, muttering and chuckling, poking at the woman and the fire with sticks that they carried and clutching at their loins repeatedly. The flames were high enough now to singe the woman's undergarments, causing them to smolder. Her long dress was sufficiently torn and disarrayed so that I could see she possessed a lovely, voluptuous form, though the smoke wrapped her in such a manner that I was unable to see her face. I rushed forward, entering the area of the black road, leaping over the long, twining grasses, and charged into the group, beheading the nearest man and running another through before they knew I was upon them. The others turned and flailed at me with their sticks, shouting as they swung them. Grace Wandeer ate off big chunks of them, until they fell apart and were silent. Their juices were black. I turned, holding my breath, and kicked away the front of the fire. Then I moved in close to the lady and cut her bonds. She fell into my arms, sobbing. It was only then that I noticed her face, or rather, her lack of one. She wore a full ivory mask, oval and curving, featureless, save for two tiny rectangular grills for her eyes. I drew her away from the smoke and the gore. She clung to me, breathing heavily, thrusting her entire body against me. After what seemed an appropriate period of time, I attempted to disentangle myself, but she would not release me, and she was surprisingly strong. "It is all right now," I said, or something equally trite and apt, but she did not reply. She kept shifting her grip upon my body, with rough, caressing movements, and a rather disconcerting effect. Her desirability was enhanced. From instant to instant, I found myself stroking her hair, and the rest of her as well. "It is all right now," I repeated. "Who are you? Why were they burning you? Who were they?" But she did not reply. She had stopped sobbing, but her breathing was still heavy, although in a different way. "Why do you wear this mask?" I reached for it, and she jerked her head back. This did not seem especially important, though. While some cold, logical part of me knew that the passion was irrational, I was as powerless as the gods of the Epicureans. I wanted her, and I was ready to have her. Then I heard Ganelon cry out my name, and I tried to turn in his direction, but she restrained me. I was amazed at her strength. "Child of Ember," came her half-familiar voice, "we owe you this for what you have given us, and we will have all of you now." Ganelon's voice came to me again, a steady stream of profanities. I exerted all of my strength against that grip, and it weakened. My hand shot forward, and I tore away the mask. There came a brief cry of anger as I freed myself, and 4 final fading words as the mask came away. "Amber must be destroyed." There was no face behind the mask. There was nothing there at all. Her garment collapsed and hung limply over my arm. She, or it, had vanished. Turning quickly, I saw that Ganelon was sprawled at the edge of the black, his legs twisted unnaturally. His blade rose and fell slowly, but I could not see what it was that he was striking. I ran toward him. The black grasses over which I had leaped were twined about his ankles and legs. Even as he hacked at them, others slashed about as though seeking to capture his sword arm. I had succeeded in partly freeing his right leg, and I leaned far forward and managed to finish the job. I moved to a position behind him, out of reach of the grasses, and tossed away the mask, which I just then realized I was still clutching. It fell to the earth beyond the edge of the black and immediately began to smolder. Catching him under the arms, I strove to drag Ganelon back. The stuff resisted fiercely, but at last I tore him free. I carried him then, leaping over the remaining dark grasses that separated us from the more docile green variety up beyond the road. He regained his footing and continued to lean heavily against me, bending forward and slapping at his leggings.
"They're numb," he said. "My legs are asleep."
I helped him back to the wagon. He transferred his grip to its side and began stamping his feet.
"They're tingling," he announced. "It's starting to come back." Ugh.
Finally, he limped to the front of the wagon. I helped him climb onto the seat and followed him up. He sighed.
"That's better," he said. "They're coming along now. That stuff just sucked the strength out of them. Out of the rest of me, too. What happened?"
Our bad omen made good on its promise.
"What now?"
I picked up the reins and released the brake. "We go across," I said. "I have to find out more about this thing. Keep your blade handy." He grunted and laid the weapon across his knees. The horses did not like the idea of going on, but I flicked their lengths lightly with the whip and they began to move. We entered the black area, and it was like riding into a World War II newsreel. Remote though near at hand, stark, depressing, grim. Even the creaking and the hoof falls were somehow muffled, made to seem more distant. A faint, persistent ringing began in my ears. The grasses beside the road stirred as we passed, though I kept well away from them. We passed through several patches of mist. They were odorless, but our breathing grew labored on each occasion. As we neared the first hill, I began the shift that would take us through shadow. We rounded the hill. Nothing. The dark miasmal prospect was unaltered. I grew angry then. I drew the pattern from memory and held it blazing before my mind's eye. I essayed the shift once more. Immediately my head began to ache. A pain shot from my forehead to the back of my skull and hung there like a hot wire. But this only fanned my anger, and caused me to try even harder to shift the black road into nothingness. Things wavered. The mists thickened, rolled across the road in billows. Outlines grew indistinct. I shook the reins. The horses moved faster. My head began to throb, felt as if it were about to come apart. Instead, momentarily, everything else did. The ground shook, cracking in places, but it was more than just that. Everything seemed to undergo a spasmodic shudder, and the cracking was more than mere fracture lines in the ground. It was as though someone had kicked the leg of a table on which a loosely assembled jigsaw puzzle lay. Gaps appeared in the entire prospect. Here a green bough, there a sparkle of water, a glimpse of blue sky, absolute blackness, white nothingness, the front of a brick building, faces behind a window, fire, a piece of star-filled sky. The horses were galloping by then, and I had all I could do to keep from screaming from the pain. A babel of mixed noises, animal, human, mechanical, washed over us. It seemed that I could hear Ganelon cursing, but I could not be certain. I thought that I would pass out from the pain, but I was determined, out of sheer stubbornness and anger, to persist until I did. I concentrated on the pattern as a dying man might cry out to his God. I threw my entire will against the existence of the Black Road. Then the pressure was off, and the horses were plunging wildly, dragging us into a green field. Ganelon snatched at the reins, but I drew on them myself and shouted to the horses until they halted. We had crossed the Black Road. I turned immediately and looked back. The scene had the wavering quality of something seen through troubled waters. Our path through it stood clean and steady, however, like a bridge or a dam, and the grasses at its edge were green.
"That was worse," Ganelon said, "than the ride you took me on when you exiled me."
"I think so too," I said, and I spoke to the horses, gently, finally persuading them to return to the dirt road and continue on along it. The world was brighter here, and the trees that we soon moved among were great pines. The air was fresh with their fragrance. Squirrels and birds moved within them. The soil was darker, richer. We seemed to be at a higher altitude than we had been before the crossing. It pleased me that we had indeed shifted, and in the direction that I had desired. Our way curved, ran back a bit, and straightened. Every now and then we caught a glimpse of the Black Road. It was not too far off to our right. We were still running roughly parallel to it. The thing definitely cut through shadow. From what we saw of it, it appeared to have settled back down to being its normal, sinister self once more. My headache faded and my heart grew somewhat lighter. We achieved higher ground and a pleasant view over a large area of hills and forest, reminding me of parts of Pennsylvania I'd enjoyed driving through years earlier. I stretched then. "How are your legs now?" I asked.
"All right,"
Ganelon said, looking back along our trail.
"I can see for a great distance, Corwin."
"Yes?"
"I see a horseman, coming very fast."
I stood and turned. I think I might have groaned as I dropped back into the seat and shook the reins. He was still too far off to tell for certain, on the other side of the Black Road. But who else could it be, pushing along at that speed on our trail? I cursed then. We were nearing the crest of the rise. I turned to Ganelon and said, "Get ready for another hell ride."
"It's Benedict?"
"I think so. We lost too much time back there. He can move awfully fast, especially through shadow, all alone like that."
"Do you think you can still lose him?"
"We'll find out," I said, "real soon now." I clucked to the horses and shook the reins again. We reached the top and a blast of icy air struck us. We leveled off, and the shadow of a boulder to our left darkened the sky. When we had passed it, the darkness remained, and crystals of fine-textured snow stung our faces and hands. Within a few moments, we were heading downward once more, and the snowfall became a blinding blizzard. The wind screamed in our ears, and the wagon rattled and skidded. I leveled us quickly. There were drifts all about by then, and the road was white. Our breath fumed, and ice glistened on trees and rocks. Motion and temporary bafflement of the senses. That was what it took. We raced on, and the wind slammed and bit and cried out. Drifts began to cover the road. We rounded a bend and emerged from the storm. The world was still a glacéed-over thing, and an occasional flake flitted by, but the sun pulled free of the clouds, pouring light upon the land, and we headed downward once more, passing through a fog and emerging in a barren, though snowless, waste of rock and pitted land. We bore to the right, regained the sun, followed a twisted course on a level plain, winding among tall, featureless strands of blue-gray stone, where, far off to our right, the Black Road paced us. Waves of heat washed over us, and the land steamed. Bubbles popped in boiling stews that filled the craters, adding their fumes to the dank air. Shallow puddles lay like a handful of old bronze coins. The horses raced, half maddened now, as geysers began to erupt along the trail. Scalding waters spewed across the roadway, narrowly missing us, running in streaming black sheets. Slick sheets. I don't know where I got black from, sorry. The sky was brass, and the sun was a mushy apple. The wind was a panting dog with bad breath. The ground trembled, and far off to our left a mountain blew its top toward the heavens and hurled fires after it. An ear-splitting crash temporarily deafened us, and concussion waves kept beating against our bodies. The wagon swayed and shimmied. The ground continued to shake, and the wind slammed us with near-hurricane force as we rushed toward a row of black-topped hills. We left what there was of a roadway when it turned in the wrong direction and headed bumping and shuddering across the plain itself. The hills continued to grow, dancing in the troubled air. I turned when I felt Ganelon's hand on my arm. He was shouting something, but I could not hear him. Then he pointed back, and I followed his gesture. I saw nothing that I had not expected to see. The air was turbulent, filled with dust, debris, ashes. I shrugged and returned my attention to the hills. A greater darkness occurred at the base of the nearest hill. I made for it. It grew before me as the ground slanted downward once more. An enormous cavern mouth, curtained by a steady fall of dust and gravel. I cracked the whip in the air, and we raced across the final 500 or 600 yards and plunged into it. I began slowing the horses immediately, letting them relax into a walk. We continued to move downward, turned a corner, came into a wide, high grotto. Light leaked down from holes high above, dappling stalactites and falling upon quivering green pools. The ground continued to shake, and my hearing took a turn for the better as I saw a massive stalagmite crumble and heard the faint tinkle of its fall. We crossed a black-bottomed chasm on a bridge that might have been limestone, which shattered behind us and vanished. Bits of rock rained down from overhead, and sometimes large stones fell. Sorry, I got interrupted and I lost my place here. We crossed a black-bottomed chasm on a bridge that might have been limestone, which shattered behind us and vanished. Bits of rock rained down from overhead, and sometimes large stones fell. Patches of green and red fungus glowed in corners and cracks. Streaks of minerals sparkled and bent. Large crystals and flat flowers of pale stone added to the moist, eerie beauty of the place. We wheeled through caverns like chains of bubbles, and coursed a wide-chested torrent until it vanished into a black hole. A long corkscrew gallery took us upward once more, and I heard Ganelon's faint voice, faint and echoing.
I thought that I glimpsed movement. That might be a rider, at the crest of the mountain, just for an instant, back there.
We moved into a slightly brighter chamber.
If it was Benedict, he's got a hard act to follow, I shouted.
And there came the tremors and muffled crashings as more things collapsed behind us. We proceeded onward and upward until finally openings began to occur overhead, giving upon patches of clear blue sky. The hoof clicks and the sounds of the wagon gradually assumed a normal volume, and their echoes came to us also. The tremors ceased, small birds darted above us, and the light increased in intensity. Then another twisting of the way, and our exit lay before us, a wide, low opening into day. We had to duck our heads as we passed beneath the jagged lintel. We bounced up and over a jutting lip of moss-covered stone, then looked upon a bed of gravel that lay like a scythed track upon the hillside, passing among gigantic trees, vanishing within them below. I made a clicking noise with my tongue, encouraging the horses on their way.
They're very tired now, Ganelon remarked.
I know. Soon they will get to rest, one way or another. The gravel crunched beneath our wheels. The smell of the trees was good.
Have you noticed it? Down there, off to our right?
What? I began, turning my head. Then, oh, I finished. The infernal black road was with us still, perhaps a mile distant. How many shadows does it cut across? I mused.
All of them, it would seem,
Ganelon suggested. I shook my head slowly. I hope not, I said. We proceeded downward, beneath a blue sky and a golden sun westering in a normal way.
I was almost afraid to come out of that cave,
Ganelon said after a time.
No telling what would be on this side.
The horses couldn't take much more. I had to let up. That was Benedict we saw. His horse had better be in very good condition. He was pushing it hard. Then to have it face all that, I think he would fall back.
Maybe it's used to it,
Ganelon said as we crunched around a bend in the night, losing sight of the cave mouth. A bend to the right, sorry. There was always that possibility, I said, and I thought of Dara again, wondering what she was doing at that moment. We wove our way steadily downward, shifting slowly and imperceptibly. Our trail kept drifting to the right, and I cursed when I realized we were nearing the Black Road. Damn, it's as persistent as an insurance salesman, I said. Feel my anger turn to something like hatred. When the time is right, I'm going to destroy that thing. Ganelon did not reply. He was taking a long drink of water. He passed me the bottle, and I did too. At length we achieved level terrain, and the trail continued to twist and curve at the least excuse. It allowed the horses to take it easy, and it would slow a mounted pursuer. About an hour later, I began to feel comfortable, and we stopped to eat. We had just about finished our meal when Ganelon, who had not removed his gaze from the hillside, stood and shaded his eyes. No, I said, leaping to my feet. I don't believe it. A lone rider had emerged from the mouth of the cave. I watched as he halted for a moment, then continued on down the trail.
What do we do now?
Ganelon asked. Let's pick up our stuff and get moving again. We can at least delay the inevitable a little longer. I want more time to think. We rolled once more, still moving at a moderate pace, though my mind was racing at full speed. There had to be a way to stop him, preferably without killing him, but I couldn't think of any. Except for the Black Road, which was edging nearer once more. We had come into a lovely afternoon in a beautiful place. It was a shame to dampen it with blood, particularly if it might be my blood. Even with his blade in his left hand, I was afraid to face him. Ganelon would be of no use to me. Benedict would barely notice him. I shifted as we took another turning. Moments later, a faint smell of smoke came to my nostrils. I shifted slightly again.
He's coming fast,
Ganelon announced.
I just saw there's smoke, flames. The woods are on fire.
I laughed and looked back. Half the hillside swam under smoke, and an orange thing raced through the green, its crackling just then reaching my ears. Of their own accord, the horses increased their pace.
Corwin, did you?
Yes. If it were steeper and there were no trees, I'd have tried an avalanche. The air was momentarily filled with birds. We drew nearer the Black Way. Firedrake tossed his head and whinnied. There were flecks of foam on his muzzle. He tried to bolt, then reared and pawed the air. Star made a frightened noise and pulled to the right. I fought a moment, regained control. Decided to let them run a bit.
He's still coming,
cried Ganelon. I cursed and we ran. Eventually, our path brought us alongside the Black Road. We were on a long straightaway, and a glance back showed me that the whole hillside was ablaze, the trail running like a nasty scar down its middle. It was then that I saw the rider. It was almost halfway down and moving like something in the Kentucky Derby. God, what a horse that had to be! I wondered what shadow had borne him. I drew on the reins, gently at first, and then harder, until finally we began to slow. We were only a few 100 feet from the Black Road by then, and I had seen to it that there was a place not too far ahead where the gap narrowed to 30 or 40. I managed to rein in the horses when we reached it. and they stood there quivering. I handed the reins to Ganelon, drew Grey Swandeer, and stepped down to the road. Why not? It was a good, clear, level area, and perhaps that black, blasted slice of land, contrasting with the colors of life and growth immediately beside it, appealed to some morbid instinct in me.
"What now?"
Ganelon asked. "We cannot shake him," I said. "And if he makes it through the fire, he will be here in a few minutes. There's no use in running any further. I'll meet him here." Ganelon twisted the reins around his sidebar and reached for his blade. "No," I said. "You cannot affect the outcome one way or the other. Here's what I want you to do. Take the wagon on up the road and wait there with it. If things are resolved to my satisfaction, we will be continuing on. If they are not, surrender immediately to Benedict. It is me that he wants, and he will be the only one left who can take you back to Avalon. And he will do it, too. You will at least retire to your homeland that way." He hesitated. "Go on," I told him. "Do as I said." He looked down at the ground. He unwound the reins. He looked at me.
"Good luck,"
he said, and he shook the horses forward. I backed off the trail, moved to a position before a small stand of saplings, and waited. I kept Grey Swandeer in my hand, glanced once at the black road, then fixed my eyes upon the trail. Before long, he appeared up near the flame line, smoke and fire all about him, burning branches falling. It was Benedict, all right. His face partly muffled, the stump of his right arm upraised to shield his eyes. Coming like some ghastly escapee from hell. Bursting through a shower of sparks and cinders, he came into the clear and plunged down on the hill. Soon I could hear the hoofbeats. A gentlemanly thing to do would be to sheath my blade while I waited. If I did that, though, I might not have a chance to draw it again. I found myself wondering how Benedict would be wearing his blade and what sort it would be. Straight, curved, long, short. He could use them all with equal facility. He had taught me how to fence. It might be smart as well as gentlemanly to sheath Grey Swandeer. He might be willing to talk first. In this way I was asking for trouble. As the hoofbeats grew louder, though, I realized I was afraid to put it away. I wiped my palm only once before he came into view. He had slowed for the turn, and he must have seen me at the same instant I saw him. He rode straight toward me, slowing, but halting did not appear to be his immediate aim. It was almost a mystical experience. I do not know how else to put it. My mind outran time as he neared, and it was as though I had an eternity to ponder the approach of this man who was my brother. His garments were filthy, his face blackened, the stump of his right arm raised, gesturing anywhere. The great beast that he rode was striped, black and red, with a wild red mane and tail, but it really was a horse, and its eyes rolled, and there was foam in its mouth, and its breathing was painful to hear. I saw then that he wore his blade slung across his back, for its haft protruded high above his right shoulder. Still slowing, eyes fixed upon me, he departed the road, bearing slightly toward my left, jerked the reins once and released them, keeping control of the horse with his knees. His left hand went up in a salute-like movement that passed above his head and seized the hilt of his weapon. It came free without a single sound, describing a beautiful arc above him and coming back to rest in a lethal position out from his left shoulder and slanting back, like a single wing of dull steel with a minuscule line of edge that gleamed like a filament of mirror. The picture he presented was burned into my mind with a kind of magnificence, a certain splendor that was strangely moving. The blade was a long scythe-like affair that I had seen him use once before. Only then we stood as allies against a mutual foe, and I had begun to believe unbeatable. Benedict had proved it otherwise that night. Now that I saw it raised against me, I was overwhelmed with a sense of my own mortality, which I had never experienced before in this fashion. It was as though a layer had been stripped from the world, and I had a sudden full understanding of death itself. The moment was gone, and I backed into the grove. I had stood there so that I could take advantage of the trees. I dropped back about 12 feet among them and took 2 steps to my left. The horse reared at the last possible moment and snorted and whinnied, moist nostrils flaring. It turned aside, tearing up turf. Benedict's arm moved with near invisible speed, like the tongue of a toad, and his blade passed through a sapling I'd guess at 3 inches in diameter. The tree continued to stand upright for a moment, and then slowly toppled. His boot struck the earth, and he strode toward me. I'd wanted the grove for this reason also, to make him come to me in a place where a long blade would be hampered by branches and boles. But as he advanced, he swung the weapon, almost casually, back and forth, and the trees fell about him as he passed. If only he were not so infernally competent. If only he were not Benedict. Benedict, I said in a normal voice. She's an adult now, and she is capable of making up her own mind about things. He gave no sign of having heard me. He just kept coming, swinging that great blade from side to side. It made an almost ringing sound as it passed through the air, followed by a soft thunk as it bit through another tree, slowing only slightly. I raised Grayswandir to point at his breast. "Come no farther, Benedict," I said. "I do not wish to fight you." He moved his blade into an attack position and said one word. "Murderer!" His hand twitched then, and my blade was almost simultaneously beaten aside. I parried the ensuing thrust, and he brushed my riposte aside and was at me again. This time I did not even bother to riposte. I simply parried, retreated, and stepped behind a tree. "I don't understand," I said, beating down his blade as it slid by the trunk and nearly skewered me. "I've not murdered anyone recently. Certainly not in Avalon." Another thunk, and the tree was falling toward me. I got out of its way and retreated, parrying. "Murderer!" he said again. "I don't know what you're talking about, Benedict." "Liar!" I stood my ground then and held it. Damn it, it was senseless to die for the wrong reason. I riposted as fast as I could, seeking openings anywhere. There were none. "At least tell me," I shouted. "Please." But he seemed to be finished with talking. He pressed forward, and I had to fall back once more. It was like trying to fence with a glacier. I became convinced then that he was out of his mind. Not that that helped me any. With anybody else, an insane madness would cause the loss of some control in a fight. But Benedict had hammered out his reflexes over the centuries, and I seriously believed that the removal of his cerebral cortex could not have altered his movements from their state of perfection. He drove me steadily back, and I dodged among trees as he cut them and down and kept coming. I made the mistake of attacking and barely stopped his counter-thrust inches from my breast. I fought down the first wave of panic that came to me when I saw that he was driving me back toward the edge of the grove. Soon he would have me in the open, with no trees to slow him. My attention was focused on him so completely that I did not realize what was then to occur until it did. With a mighty cry, Ganelon sprang from somewhere, wrapping his arms about Benedict and pinning his sword arm to his side. Even had I really wanted to, though, I did not have the opportunity to kill him then. He was too fast, and Ganelon was not aware of the man's strength. Benedict twisted to his right, interposing Ganelon between us, and at the same time brought the stump of his right arm around like a club, striking Ganelon in the left temple. Then he pulled his left arm free, seized Ganelon by his belt, swept him off his feet, and threw him at me. As I stepped aside, he retrieved his blade from where it had fallen near his feet and came at me again. I barely had time to glance and see that Ganelon had landed in a heap some 10 paces to my rear. I parried and resumed my retreat. I only had one trick remaining, and it saddened me that if it failed, Amber would be deprived of its rightful liege. It is somewhat more difficult to fence with a good left-hander than a good right-hander, and this worked against me also, but I had to experiment a bit. There was something I had to learn, even if it meant taking a chance. I took a long step back, moving momentarily out of range, then leaned forward and attacked. It was a very calculated thing, and very fast. One unexpected result, which I was certain was at least partly luck, was that I got through, even though I missed my target. For an instant, Grey Swandeer rode high off of one of his parries and nicked his left ear. This slowed him slightly for a few moments, but not enough to matter. If anything, it served to straighten his defense. I continued to press my attack, but there was simply no getting through then. It was only a small cut, but the blood ran down his earlobe and spattered off, a few drops at a time. It could even be distracting, if I permitted myself to do more than take note of it. Then I did what I feared but had to try. I left him a small opening, just for a moment, knowing that he would come right through it toward my heart. He did, and I parried it at the last instant. I did not like to think about how close he came that time. Then I began to yield once more, giving ground, backing out of the grove, parrying and retreating. I moved past the spot where Ganelon lay. I fell back another 15 feet or so, fighting defensively, conservatively. And then I gave Benedict another opening. He drove in, as he had before, and I managed to stop him again. He pressed the attack even harder after that, pushing me to the edge of the black road. There I stopped and held my ground, shifting my position to the spot I had chosen. I would have to hold him for just a few moments longer, to set him up. There were some very rough moments, but I fought furiously and readied myself. Then I gave him the same opening again. I knew he would come in the same as before, and my right leg was across the back behind my left, then straightening as he did. I gave his blade but the barest beat to the side as I sprang backward onto the black road, immediately extending my arm full length to discourage a balestra. Then he did what I had hoped. He beat at my blade and advanced normally when I dropped it into court, causing him to step into the patch of black grasses over which I had leaped. I dared not look down at first. I simply stood my ground and gave the flora a chance. It only took a few moments. Benedict became aware of it the next time that he tried to move. I saw the puzzled expression flash across his face, then the strain. It had him, I knew. I doubted, though, that it could hold him for very long, and so I moved immediately. I danced to the right, out of range of his blade, rushed forward, and sprang across the grasses, off the black road once again. He tried to run, but they had twined themselves about his legs all the way up to his knees. He swayed for a moment, but retained his balance. I passed behind him and to his right. One easy thrust, and he was a dead man. But of course, there was no reason to do it now. He swung his arm back behind his neck and turned his head, pointing the blade at me. He began pulling his left leg free. But I feinted toward his right, and when he moved to parry it, I slapped him across the back of the neck with the flat of Grey Swandeer. It stunned him, and I was able to move in and punch him in the kidney with my left hand. He bent slightly, and I blocked his sword arm and struck him in the back of the neck again, this time with my fist, hard. He fell, unconscious, and I removed his blade from his hand and cast it aside. The blood from his left earlobe trailed down his neck like some exotic earring. I put Grey Swandeer aside, seized Benedict under the armpits, and dragged him back from the black road. The grasses resisted mightily, but I strained against them and finally had him free. Ganelon had gotten to his feet by then. He limped up and stood beside me, looking down at Benedict.
"What a fellow he is," he said. "What a fellow he is. What are we going to do with him?"
I picked him up in a fireman's carry and stood. "Take him back toward the wagon right now," I said. "Will you bring the blades?"
"All right."
I headed up the road, and Benedict remained unconscious, which was good, because I did not want to have to hit him again if I could help it. I deposited him at the base of a sturdy tree beside the road near the wagon. I resheathed our blades when Ganelon came up, and set him to stripping ropes from several of the cases. While he did this, I searched Benedict and found what I was looking for. I bound him to the tree then, while Ganelon fetched his horse. We tethered it to a nearby bush, upon which I also hung his blade. Then I mounted to the driver's seat of the wagon, and Ganelon came up alongside.
"Are you just going to leave him there?"
he asked. "For now," I said. We moved on up the road. I did not look back, but Ganelon did.
"He hasn't moved yet," he reported. Then, "Nobody ever just took me and threw me like that. With one hand yet.
That's why I told you to wait with the wagon, and not to fight with him if I lost.
What is to become of him now?
I will see that he is taken care of soon.
You'll be all right, though?
I nodded.
Good.
We continued on for perhaps 2 miles, and I halted the horses. I climbed down. Don't be upset by anything that happens, I said. I'm going to make arrangements for Benedict now. I moved off the road and stood in the shade, taking out the deck of trumps Benedict had been carrying. I riffled through them, located Gerard, and removed him from the pack. The rest I returned to the silk-lined wooden case, inlaid with bone, in which Benedict had carried them. I held Gerard's trump before me and regarded it. After a time, it grew warm, real, began to stir. I felt Gerard's actual presence, and he was in amber. He was walking down a street that I recognized. He looks a lot like me, only larger, heavier. I saw that he still wore his beard. He halted and stared.
Corwin!
Yes, Gerard, you are looking well.
Your eyes, you can see?
Yes, I can see again.
Where are you?
Come to me now, and I will show you. His gaze tightened.
I am not certain I can do that, Corwin.
I am very involved just now. Sorry, I'm changing his voice. It is Benedict, I said, and you are the only one I can trust to help him. Benedict? Is he in trouble? Yes. Then why does he not summon me himself? He is unable to. He is restrained. Why? How? It is too long and involved to go into now. Believe me, he needs your help, and right away. He raked his beard with his upper teeth. And you cannot handle it yourself? Absolutely not. And you think I can? I know you can. He loosened his blade in its scabbard. I would not like to think this is some sort of trick, Corwin. I assure you it is not. With all the time I've had to think, I would have come up with something a little more subtle than that. He sighed, and then he nodded. All right, I'm coming to you. Come ahead. He stood for a moment, then took a step forward. He stood beside me. He reached out and clasped my shoulder. He smiled. Colwyn, he said, I'm glad you've got your eyes back. I looked away. So am I. So am I. Who's that in the wagon? A friend. His name is Ganelon. Where is Benedict? What is the problem? I gestured. Back there, I said. About 2 miles down the road. He's bound to a tree. His horse is tethered nearby. Then why are you here? I'm fleeing. From what? Benedict. I'm the one who bound him. He wrinkled his brow. I do not understand. I shook my head. There was a misunderstanding between us. I could not reason with him, and we fought. I knocked him unconscious, and I tied him up. I cannot free him, or he would attack me again. Neither can I leave him as he is. He may come to some harm before he can free himself. And so I summoned you. Please go to him, release him, and see him home. What will you be doing the while? Getting the hell out of here, losing myself in shadow. You'll be doing both of us a favor to keep him from trying to follow me again. I do not want to have to fight with him a second time. I see. Now will you tell me what happened? I'm not certain. He called me a murderer. I give you my word I slew no one the whole time I was in Avalon. Please tell him I said that. I have no reason to lie to you, and I swear that it is true. There's another matter which may have disturbed him somewhat. If he mentions it, tell him that he will have to rely on Dara's explanation. And what is it? I shrugged. You'll know if he mentions it. If he does not, forget it. Dara, you say? Yes. Very well, I shall do as you have asked. Now, will you tell me how you managed your escape from Amber? I smiled. Academic interest? Or do you feel you might have need of the route yourself one day? He chuckled. Well, it does strike me as a handy piece of information to have. I regret, dear brother, that the world is not yet ready for this knowledge. If I had to tell anyone, it would be you. But there's no way it could benefit you, whereas its secrecy may serve me in the future. In other words, you have a private way into and out of Amber. What are you planning, Corwin? What do you think? The answer is obvious, but my feelings on the matter are mixed. Care to tell me about them?" He gestured toward a section of the black road that was visible from where he stood. "That thing," he said. "It runs to the foot of Colvere now. A variety of menaces travel it to attack Amber. We defend, we are always victorious. But the attacks grow stronger, and they come more frequently. Now would not be a good time for you to move, Corbin. Or it might be the perfect time," I said. "For you, then, but not necessarily for Amber." "How has Eric been handling the situation?" "Adequately. As I said, we are always victorious. I do not mean the attacks. I mean the entire problem, its cause. I have traveled the Black Road myself, going a great distance along it. And I was unable to go the entire distance. You know how the shadows grow wilder and stranger the farther you get from Amber? Yes. Until the mind itself is twisted and turned towards madness. Yes. And somewhere beyond this lie the courts of chaos. The road goes on, Colwyn, and I am convinced that it runs the entire distance." "Then it is as I feared," I said. "That is why, whether I sympathize with you or not, I do not recommend the present time for your efforts. The security of Amber must come before all else." "I see. Then there is something more to be said just now." "Then there is nothing more to be said just now, sorry." "And your plans? Since you do not know what they are, it is meaningless to tell you that they are unchanged. But they are unchanged. I do not know whether to wish you luck, but I wish you well. I am glad that you have your sight back." He clasped my hand. "I had best get on to Benedict now. I take it he is not badly hurt?" "Not by me. I only hit him a few times." "Do not forget to give him my message." "I won't." "And take him back to Avalon." "I will try." "Then goodbye for now, Gerard." "Goodbye, Colwyn." He turned then and walked on down the road. I watched until he was out of sight before I returned to the wagon. Then I replaced his trump on the deck and continued on my way to Antwerp. And that is the end. Oh, that was a long chapter. I was going to do double chappy this time, but my throat is killing me. That was a pretty long chapter. Hold on. How long is the next chapter? Also, someone earlier, whenever I was interrupted, this is a short chapter. You know what? We'll double chappy. 100% we'll double chappy next time. Okay? 100%. Because it's only like a 10-page chapter. I would do it right now, but I did promise that after I read my current chapter that I would go do something. So I will do the thing that I said. Next time we'll double chappy. And I believe... Hold on. Let me just read through this real quick. That the double chappy next time might just go ahead and finish up the whole book. So, I guess next time we're going to be finishing The Guns of Avalon. And I will see you guys then.